thank you, Dominic, and I really just wanted to say how delighted I am to be able to come along to the conference today. I know as a local MP in Putney, where VSO is based, just how much work goes on every day of the week all over the country in organisations like yours, and how important it is. So to be able to see so many of you in one room at the same time is actually a pretty special event. And I know how hard many of you work on many of the same issues that we are concerned with in DFID, doing amazing work all over the world, helping many of the poorest people on our planet. And I want to particularly thank those of you who have provided humanitarian assistance over recent months and years, particularly in the Sahel over the past year, but obviously in the longer term and tackling key Millennium Development Goals on poverty, and I think recognising that there are still over 1 billion people today who live on our planet on less than $1.25 a day. So it's a huge honour for me to be in this role, to be able to work alongside you. As you've heard, I have been out and about already. It feels like a lot longer than, I think it's week 6 now, but it feels like a lot longer. I have been to the UN in New York. That was my first trip there. I've been to Kenya, I've been to Somalia. I've been to the World Bank meeting in Tokyo in Japan, and I've been to meet many of my European Development Minister colleagues in Luxembourg. And actually, this is my first full working week in the UK that I've had. So I think my team's finding it quite bizarre that I'm hanging around the place quite so much, having meetings. But it's really good for me, I think, to have hit the ground running. And really, today I wanted to talk about 3 things. Firstly, why development's so important. I think, secondly, to give you my take, if you like, on what I think are the emerging challenges in development, both not just in the run-up to 2015, which is clearly a really important time for us and for many people, but after that too. And then I particularly want to zone in almost and talk about the DFID view on this, our organisation, my organisation. And perhaps when we open up to the panel, we can see how much of an analogy there is to many of your organisations and the challenges that you face over the coming years. So firstly, why is development important? Well, a couple of weeks ago I addressed the Conservative Party conference, and I was very clear that I think that international development isn't just the right thing to do. I actually think that for the country and indeed for the world's economy, it's a smart thing to do as well. I think it's the right thing to do because we have a duty to help the poorest people in our world. And I think it's the right thing because our country has an amazing history of generosity. Many of our NGOs that operate internationally are based right here in the UK. All of you sat in this room today are evidence of that generosity and the funds that you raise in order to be able to keep your organisations going. In fact, in 2010, I think people gave an amazing £2.6 billion to help charitable causes overseas. So clearly our government wants to reflect that ethos in policy. But we also believe that international development's the smart thing to do too. Because ultimately it's in all our interests for countries around the world to be stable, to be secure, and to have educated and healthy populations. And I think that if we can put those things in place over time, and I think there is evidence, clear evidence, that the development agenda is succeeding in doing that, then I think it ultimately means more countries that Britain can trade with and more jobs that we can create right here in the UK. And I think it contributes greatly towards a gradually better and safer world, which is why I and the coalition government are committed and will remain committed to meeting this 0.7% target. But let me now turn to some of the challenges that I think we face over the next few years. It's still a world, obviously, where the world's poorest face huge difficulties. But it's also, I think, a world of opportunity for us as well. And there's no doubt when you look at where we are now compared to where we were in 2000 when we set the Millennium Development Goals, I think the world's changed dramatically. I think the good news is that countries are developing. In fact, the largest number of poor people now live in many of the middle-income countries, like China, India, and Brazil, and those countries themselves are, as they continue to develop, playing an ever more important role, not just in our world economy, but in world politics more broadly. But I think what they show is that we are delivering our development agenda in a more complicated environment, and an environment that changes at an ever faster pace. And I think that one of the challenges we face is that as those countries continue to develop, we need to continue to make sure we refocus our aid on the poorest countries. And it also means that we're often delivering our aid programs in countries that are fragile, complex, often violent places. And I think that when you look at places like Afghanistan or Somalia, where I was a few weeks ago, they're incredibly challenging environments to make change happen on the ground. And I think they pose us with some real questions about how we can best deliver in those sorts of places going forward. But I think it's not just the role of some of those governments and countries that's changed since 2000. Another thing that's emerged is technology. And the internet and communications revolution, I think, has created huge opportunities in developed countries. We've all seen that. You think about all the equipment you would have brought to a Bond conference in 2000 compared to what you've got in your handbags and pockets today. I mean, it's transformed, absolutely transformed. But it does also mean that there are huge opportunities for developing countries too. Not just in terms of their economies, but in terms of how we can deliver and target aid to people going forward. There's opportunities for commerce as well, and I think finally and importantly for us as government, there are real opportunities, I think, for more open communities and giving people a voice, perhaps who haven't been able to have one in the past. I think the final thing, of course, that we've seen is a real change in the macroeconomic environment, the global economy. Where we're at now is that advanced economies like our own are still suffering in the after effects of, I think, what will be seen as one of the largest global downturns in decades. And of course, even economies like China and India, these powerhouses really that have been one of the things that has kept the global economy going over the last few years, even they're now having their own challenges in maintaining those growth rates. And I think the sorts of other challenges we've seen coming through, which we feel here in Britain too, challenges around commodity prices and cost of living, financial flows, all of those make the agenda in which we're having to do what we do best, which is help countries transform and help communities transform. I think it makes it even more challenging, particularly now, than it has been in recent years. I think set alongside that, we also all recognise that in terms of how people feel about this development agenda here in the UK, that becomes more challenging too as they look at their own lives and see ever greater challenges. But I think however much the world has changed and continues to change, we need to adapt to that. But I think even as we do, there are and there will be some things that, for me at any rate, stay the same in terms of importance. And one particular thing that I want to focus on and that I will hopefully bring to bear in this role is particularly this role of girls and women within development. The world over, it's still the case that girls and women die in childbirth because they don't have the medical care that they need. It's often girls and women who bear the brunt of stagnant economies and lack of job opportunities. And I think in too many societies, it's girls and women who don't have that equal voice. And I think that if we're going to have development, it's got to be development for everybody, not just some people. And so the UK government will continue to put girls and women at the heart of our international development agenda. And as the Prime Minister said last month to the United Nations General Assembly, we are going to do our bit to ensure that girls and women have a full role in society, in economy and in politics, because you can't ultimately build strong economies, strong communities and inclusive political systems if you lock women out of that. So our role in that, I think, as a lead government on this agenda is absolutely critical. And I'm, on a personal level, very concerned about some of the increasing challenges internationally that we all face in protecting women's rights. I think progress has been very hard won, and we've got to ensure that women's empowerment and rights are protected and strengthened over the coming years, not eroded. And I believe that many of you in your organisations, working alongside faith-based organisations, diasporas, I've got many in my own community within London, I think we all have a critical role working together to try and push that agenda forward. I think the final challenge really that I wanted to raise as a broad challenge for all of us is really also an opportunity in many respects, because with the debate on the post-2015 Millennium Development Goals, we've got a real unprecedented opportunity really to shape a consensus on where next after 2015. I think many of those debates that we're going to have over the next 2 to 3 years are going to be critical in helping us make sure we're in a position to further eradicate poverty. And we, as a government, are strongly committed with everyone else to developing a framework that's not just the right framework that's useful, but one that's absolutely relevant to poor people throughout the world. And the Prime Minister will have a lot more to say on this over the coming weeks and months, starting next week, when he and we host the high-level panel meeting in London. And I think I'd just like to very briefly set out some thoughts on how we're going to approach that post-2015 MDG framework. Because I think, first of all, we've got to remember that we still haven't delivered on the first one fully. So we've got to speed up progress on current MDGs. And we've got to ensure that whatever comes next is designed to finish off this job on tackling poverty and human well-being issues. And I think we also need to heed and to learn some of the lessons from the original Millennium Development Goals, building on what worked, what didn't work. And for example, we need to address, as I've mentioned already, making sure that girls and women participate across their countries' different aspects of life. But we need to understand some of the challenges that we've particularly seen around conflict-ridden states and fragile states, and how difficult it's been to make progress on MDGs there. And I think underlying all of this is a need to remember that we've got to try and tackle the root causes of poverty rather than perhaps just the symptoms. And that means putting in place the building blocks of prosperity. And the Prime Minister has talked about these very much in terms of a golden thread of development. And I think at its most fundamental, for me, the golden thread is really about what people want alongside their lives in a day-to-day basis. They want to be able to register the land that they live on. If they own a business, they want that to be legitimately set up and have some law to work around and work within. They probably want a police force and some security for themselves and their family. And in short, they really just want to be able to get on with their lives without having to worry too much around the rest of the infrastructure that they're having to deal with. And I think that the importance particularly of transparency and getting those right conditions to secure growth and jobs are absolutely critical building blocks if we're going to see long-term development. So those are the challenges that I think we're going to all face together. There aren't many easy answers to any of them, but I believe that we can continue to move in the right direction. And then finally, I really just wanted to say a few things around what all of this adds up to, I think, for all of us, and in particular for me, leading DFID. If I go back to some of the points I just mentioned, making sure that women and girls are centre stage on this agenda matters hugely. I'm going to be hosting a cross-party, in fact cross-parliamentarian meeting in the House of Commons to try and better bring together those thought leaders that we have in Parliament on this issue, so that we can work more collectively on that agenda. Obviously within government we had a summit on family planning earlier this year that the Prime Minister and the Gates Foundation hosted, and we will continue to play our role on this agenda, but clearly NGOs themselves have a huge role to play as well in setting this high on the international agenda. And I would ask you to work with us in the run-up to the Commission on the Status of Women in 2013, and to make sure that you're reaching out to those organisations you work with to ensure a significantly stronger outcome on those discussions than we were able to achieve earlier this year. Another challenge I've talked about clearly is the post-2015 MDG agenda. Again, help us to make sure we get the right outcome on that. It's absolutely critical. Bond's work on the Beyond 2015 group is a really vital part of that process, and I very much look forward to seeing that group's work develop over the coming weeks and months. And underpinning a lot of this is, I think, having, for all of us actually, very robust systems in place on transparency, accountability and value for money. And I think all of us need to ensure that whether the public has given £1 to us in DFID as part of their taxes to spend on development, or whether they've given you £1 to one of your organisations for the work that you do, I think people always want to see value for money, and they want to see some transparency in terms of what we're all doing. And I very much want the UK to be at the forefront of that leadership on transparency, accountability, and most importantly achieving results. I think we can be, and I think we should be. And I think that all of us who are in this area of international development need to ask ourselves what we can do to push forward that agenda, and making sure we've got the best people, the best processes, the best systems in place to help us do that, so that we don't waste a single penny of this budget on anything, and it's all focused on transforming lives on the ground. I'm actually very proud that DFID and many of our UK NGOs are right at the forefront of this. Apparently, I asked to see just how well we're doing on this agenda. DFID grantees, so in other words the people we give grants to, represent 89% of all NGOs worldwide who've published data to the International Aid Transparency Initiative, which is a real testament to just how important I think we all see this agenda. And I would urge all of you to make sure you're signed up, and the great thing would be if we could get 100% compliance over the next few months. And I know that the Bond Effectiveness Programme, with support from DFID, is trying to make sure that we lead and challenge the sector to keep doing what it's doing, but do it even better, more transparently and more effectively by providing greater value for money. So that's our challenge, and indeed for my part I've already started to look at what we can do within DFID, particularly putting my accountant hat on, how we can improve what we do. And in fact one of the first things I have done is to lower the threshold at which projects come to me for approval. So there used to be £40 million before they would land on my desk, and now they're 5. And today I'm going to announce that we're going to go further than that. And indeed ministerial approval is now going to be in place for all contracts worth over £1 million and for key areas of administrative spend. I know that people want me to be accountable for the spend that happens in DFID, and that's precisely what I intend to be. I'm also reviewing DFID's use of consultants to see how we can improve value for money. And I hope that the suppliers that we use can really show me that they're not just in it for the money. And over the next few weeks I will see all of our top suppliers, so that they understand that in future our department will be looking for better value for money in its decisions to award new contracts, and I'm absolutely adamant that we strive to maximise impact in every possible way, and I'm acutely aware of how important this whole agenda is to those people whose lives we're trying to improve on behalf of UK taxpayers. And then finally, the other way of progressing the way we work is clearly by technology and research, and I think we've got to make sure that we learn as much as we can from the projects that are happening on the ground. And interestingly, when you look at places like Kenya, where I was last month, a quarter of national GDP now flows through mobile banking. And I think what it shows is that there is a real emerging agenda here on technology, and I want DFID to be absolutely at the heart of that agenda, that innovation, being pioneers of technology. And I think those technologies can really help us speed up the pace of eliminating poverty. My aim is that DFID will be, and continue to be, a real centre of excellence for the international development agenda, working with you. And on technology next month, I will be co-hosting an event with leading global players on mobile and web technology, and with civil society, which is going to really focus on how governments can help millions of poor people hold their decision makers to account and improve their lives. So I really want to finish by extending an invitation to all of you, because I know that we will often come at our shared endeavour from many different angles, and we may focus on slightly different things, but I think ultimately we are in pursuit of the same goal. And as campaigners and as membership organisations, I know that you've got a huge role to play in holding the government to account, and so you should. But I want us to be leaders together on aid transparency and effectiveness. And of course, as we get towards next year, which is the year that the UK hosts the G8, we're going to keep on debating and keep on listening to what you have to say on a range of issues, including on food and agriculture, on which I know that many of you are already extremely active. I'll just finish by saying I think we all want to improve people's lives and live in a safer and more prosperous world. So I hope we can continue to exchange views, share ideas. I'm very much looking forward to working with Bond. It was set up in 1994. I think it's done a huge amount of work since for the good, and I think that my job is to try and do what I can to work and help lead DFID, but also work alongside Bond and all the work that you do to transform lives across the world. Thank you.
Yes, I think so. Sorry, I'm the logistics. Minister's said that she's got time for just, I think, about 10 minutes of questions before she rushes off elsewhere. I'm going to try and get, if you could say who you are and what you want to say very rapidly. Yeah, in the middle there. So mic come to you, yes. Can I gather two or three? Is that
yeah,
okay?
of course.
Joe Powell from the One campaign. You mentioned your visit to Luxembourg last week, and obviously we're in the midst of a very tough round of EU budget negotiations. And it was welcome to hear you talk about how you wanted to reform EU aid to make it better and so on. But obviously the volume matters as well. There is 51 billion at stake, 5% of the overall budget, for two really effective instruments, the Development Cooperation Instrument and the European Development Fund. So I guess I'd be interested to hear your take on that, and whether you can reassure us that Britain will be fighting for those funds in Brussels over the coming weeks.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah.
Secretary of State, thank you very much for your comments. I'm on the Bond Beyond 2015 group, so we're working with you on the high-level panel meeting. My name's Anna Feuchtwang, I'm from Every Child. The Beyond 2015 group really believes that sustainability, equality, universality and participation are some of the key principles, and you've mentioned some of those. But you've also talked about, so I think, both women and girls in conflict as some priorities. I wondered if you could tell us what your vision is for what the post-MDG framework could really achieve. And secondly, whether you as Secretary of State in DFID will be playing a key role in bringing a government position together beyond DFID as well. Thank you.
Okay. And then, yes, here.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Walugembe from Action on Disability and Involvement International, Country Director of AD International in Uganda. It's a great honor to be speaking before all of you. And Secretary, I want to make quick comments about 2 points you made in your speech. First is the point of the generosity of the UK population. Probably I should give you a live example. And by extending very sincere gratitude to a family from the UK, a family that I've never met and probably I'll never meet, a family who decided to use their pension to pay for my education right through high school, through university, even before my government had recognized the importance of universal education. They, with their good heart, knew that a visually impaired person from Africa needs a good education. So, yeah, I wish to extend that to the generosity of the British public. Secondly, in your presentation, you talked about opportunities, creating opportunity for voice for those who've been voiceless. And you've rightly identified the girl child and women. My plea and request to you is, could you also, in the same spirit, extend that same desire for being heard to people with disabilities, that you take a lead to be their personal champion, especially in the forthcoming post-MDG discussion. For us, we think that the MDGs didn't have any mention of disabilities, and could be the reason why people with disabilities may have not benefited as much, and therefore calling upon your generosity, the strong value system of the British public, that disability also gets to be had with your leadership. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Perhaps you could wrestle with those three first. Yeah. Thank you, Joseph, especially.
Just on the EU budget, I think from our government's perspective, we want to have two debates. One is the totality of the amount, setting an envelope, if you like, for what the British taxpayer and should be going into Europe. But within that, the development agenda is then one of our priorities. So I think what we found, our analysis of what's happened before, is that because all of the individual areas have argued for getting more and more and more money, what's never actually happened effectively, to my mind, is a debate on priorities. We do think this is one of the priorities, and we will be making the case for it as part of those budget discussions. They're going to be obviously quite fundamental ones, and we'll have to see how they get on. But it will be one of the areas that we focus on. It's fair to say that the European Development Fund, when we put that through our multilateral aid review in 2011, came out with a good score. I think that things can always improve, and I met the commissioner who looks after it last week, which is extremely helpful. I think some of the other areas under heading 4 have got some real need to be equally looking at how they can be more targeted, where they can make the best difference as well. So I'm quite keen to help provide momentum where things are moving in the right direction, and then add some momentum where they're not. Just on the questions on the Beyond 2015 group, and really where women and that issue of conflict can fit in, I think we do see it as a fundamental part. Gender absolutely has to be very explicitly part of those post-2015 MDG goals, whatever we end up with the framework. In fact, William Hayes talked about this issue of sexual violence in conflict situations only over the last few weeks. And I think that is one of the things for us as a government that we're very concerned to make sure is part of those discussions. I think more broadly, the point that you made on your education and the chances you'd had, I mean, I don't think, I mean, who would I don't think any of us would be where we are now without education. I certainly wouldn't be, and that's why I think this agenda is so important. I think the thing that drove me really to want to try and give it a go representing people is, I think, first of all, everybody's got something to say that's worth listening to, and I think secondly, everybody has potential, and I think it's finding what that potential is. But I think if we don't have countries where people are able to have the education they need to develop, then that's a very difficult situation, I think, for individuals as well as countries. I think I'd be a very frustrated person if I hadn't had my education. And I think on disability, I actually think that after the Olympics and the Paralympics, I think Britain did show that for us that agenda matters massively. I think in my last job in transport, making sure our public transport is something that people with disability can use is one of the things I was increasingly turning my attention to. And I think that maybe your comments, they're very well made, and I think maybe the way we get to them is talking about inclusiveness, inclusive societies, that actually they should be goals that cover everybody, not just some people. And maybe that's one of the ways that we can make sure that we move forward, helping economies and countries develop for all of their community, not just some of them.
Thank you very much indeed. Right at the back there.
Jessica Woodruff from the Gender and Development Network. So it won't surprise you to hear that I'm extremely pleased to hear what you were saying, not just about gender equality, but also the stress on women's empowerment. And the two things aren't the same, and I really welcome the fact that you're talking about women's empowerment as well. If I can also link that to the post-2015 debate, what we want to make sure is that the approach towards gender actually takes a major step forward from MDG 3, which would mean still having a specific standalone goal on gender equality and women's empowerment, but also within that actually addressing, as you mentioned, the root causes of gender equality rather than just mainstreaming gender under the other goals. What's your view on that? Will the UK government be putting forward a request for a specific standalone goal on gender equality and women's empowerment, which has within it goals which tackle gender equality rather than just ameliorating inequality?
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Richard Miller, I'm Director of ActionAid. First of all, thanks very much for coming today, because I think it sends a really positive signal to our sector of your commitment to work in partnership with us, which is something that we all want to do. Secondly, obviously we welcome the focus on women's rights. We also welcome what you said at the Conservative Party conference about the importance of ending aid dependency. And one of the ways of doing that, I think, is to take action on tax dodging, because poor countries lose more in tax than they get in aid. You can do that by building poor countries' ability to collect tax revenue, and also through global action. And the UK, as you know, next year with its leadership of the G8 is in a position to take action on that. So I'll be interested in your observations on that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Paul Valentin from Christian Aid. My question refers to something you mentioned in passing. We believe that there is an important role for UK aid in strengthening civil society in the South, so that they can hold their governments to account for their commitment to reduce national inequalities and poverty. But as you said, 75% of poor people now live in middle-income countries. How can DFID and NGOs work together to ensure that we address the civil society strengthening as well as public attitudes to provide aid to middle-income countries?
We'll squeeze one more, and you were trying to get in. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Rob Williams from War Child. I'd like to pick up on your comments about conflict, which are extremely welcome, because we know the MDGs, although they may have worked for many, have not worked for children in conflict areas. And these are the really hard cases in the development sphere. These are the children in Syria who are beyond humanitarian reach, and the girls and women who are still being raped in their thousands in the DRC. DFID's made a major commitment to reducing conflict, and with your partners at the Foreign Commonwealth Office, it's becoming a major piece of programming for the UK government. But there are lots of examples around the world where you can see that we haven't quite got it right. There are still thousands of children who are beyond protection. And I'm wondering if there's going to be some new thinking about how that partnership can be more effective at providing real protection for children in conflict zones.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, right.
Rattle through those
now
minor
I'm just
issues.
scribbling them all down. I'm just scribbling them all down. Just on the first point on gender equality, not just ameliorating it, as you said. It is something we're looking at, how we can make sure it really is properly centre stage. I'm not going to say we've got all the answers yet, and obviously we're in a negotiation as well, I guess, with the other countries. But I do think this is really important. Actually, I think it's to my mind, it sits alongside this golden thread agenda. I think it's one of the ingredients that countries need for success. So I do think it will be one of the areas that we have some debate on, and I think it's one of the areas we need to have a debate on as well, as a matter of fact. Just on ending aid dependency and tax dodging, well, as a former Treasury Minister, I'm not into tax dodging at all. And in fact, I did actually meet with David Gauke, Exchequer Secretary, who looks after HMRC, yesterday to talk about how perhaps we can work together more effectively. And I've got a few ideas about what we might be able to do. But I think it is important, and I think it's not just good for the countries themselves. I think it's actually a good message for the British public. I think they understand some of those issues very clearly too. So that is something that I will focus on. On middle-income countries and this challenge really, that as we see countries developing successfully, actually, when they're big economies, they do still have a high proportion of the world's poor people in them. You know, we are in discussions with people like India to talk about what's the best way to work with those economies, not just for us in terms of DFID, but just generally. How should institutions like the World Bank, for example, work with countries as they transition, and how can we strike this right balance between providing support for the poorest people who are there, but at the same time making sure that the countries themselves have some sovereignty over their decisions about equality and their development themselves in terms of civil society about what they think is right. I think in a sense it's a good challenge for us to have, because it shows that countries are developing and it shows that they are increasingly able to tackle many of their own problems. I think the learning that we're going through at the moment is how do we work with those countries as the relationship starts to move from predominantly aid to a higher proportion of trade and economic growth basis. And indeed, the secondary question on that is, if we're going to work with countries on economic growth, is it smart for us to look at the sorts of growth that will be highly job creating and more labour intensive, so that actually people do get lifted more broadly than just creating growth that ends up in the pockets of a few individuals. So I think you're quite right to raise that. I think it's one of the trickiest issues, and indeed it's something that Christian Aid and Loretta Minghella have talked about. How do you do, she's called it an exit strategy. I'm not so sure whether it's per se an exit strategy. I think it's how do you change the strategy to make sure it's the right one for the country that you're working with as it has changed itself. And then just the final point, which was around conflict. I think you're right. The UK has done a lot of very good work on this. We've got this conflict pool budget that we've set up that necessarily fuses together DFID, Foreign Office and MOD and gets us working more collectively. But I think it feels to me, coming into this role, quite early days. So we're still learning the best way of working together and in those states. And I think that we need to make sure that as we go through some of those programs and as we work in countries maybe like Somalia, that we really do take the time to sit back and say, well, what's been effective and what hasn't. I think the final thing that strikes me is so much of this agenda is about people. and in a sense, how can we make sure as a government that we're nimble, so that when good opportunities come up, when good people come into roles that we think we really can work with, we should make sure that we don't let the grass grow under our feet and get on with providing the support that they need. And I think that can often be a bit of a challenge, but it does strike me that there are many countries where they will have little progress for years, maybe even decades, and then suddenly a window of opportunity emerges. And I think countries like Britain and DFID need to be in a position to respond quickly to that. So that's a huge agenda, one that I think is extremely sensitive and really at the sharp end of why doing what we do well is actually quite tough when it comes down to actually delivering on the ground. But I'm looking forward to going up what is still a vertical learning curve, no doubt, over the next few months on all of these areas. Suffice to say, really, that I will do my level best to show some leadership on behalf of DFID and to do my best on behalf of the UK on this agenda.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Secretary of State. I know we're pushing our time envelope. I was just thinking as you were going through all those questions, if any one of us was thrown into your old field of transport or any other field and 6 weeks later was able to kind of come across all of those issues in terms of kind of understanding all the issues and being able to kind of cover those, I'm sure I wouldn't be able to do that. So thank you very much indeed for making the time in what has been a very busy schedule. And Minister's always busy, but it is a particularly busy time, for taking the trouble to come and meet with us, to engage with us. I think it's been really worthwhile, and we certainly look forward to working with you. As you say, we won't always agree, but I know you're somebody already from my conversations with you that kind of understands that, and that we can work in partnership. We can disagree in some areas, and that's what we look forward to doing. So thank you very much indeed for your time, Secretary of State.
I know what you meant. Thank you.
Don't run away, because we will be continuing straight on with the plenary. Can I ask our panel members to come up to the front here? And the reason I'm loitering at the front here is to tell you that what I should be doing now is introducing Paul Mason from Newsnight as your compere for the panel.